What's going on today, everybody? It's your boy Jim Owl, aka Hindu, coming at you with another video this week. And for this week's video, we have a pretty special one. As you can tell from my previous three videos, I am primarily a gaming YouTube channel, and I love to game myself. I have been gaming, I think, for about 20 years now, going back to roughly 2005 when my parents got me a GameCube for Christmas. And since then, I have cycled between five or so different systems, playing a plethora of different video games. And today, as you can tell by the title, I'm coming at you with my top 10 favorite video games of all time. So let's get right into it. So starting out the list of my honorable mentions is Madden '08. This was really the first and only football game I ever got into, and I played it on the GameCube, although it was also available on the PS2 and the 360. This game was a ton of fun. I remember playing as the Packers in just the season and going 16-0. Also ran the skills camp and just did a whole bunch of running back drills. I preferred running the ball instead of passing in this game because I kind of suck at football games. But it was a good time nonetheless. Once you play the game enough, you also unlocked a couple of different hidden teams with special abilities, like the Tridents, the Deceivers, and the Glaciers. And I think there's one more that I'm forgetting as well. But a couple things I want to note with this game. One is that the play action fullback flat play was absolutely overpowered, and one of my favorite aspects of this game was the soundtrack. It was banger after banger after banger, and overall this game was just a glorious time. Sticking to the theme of sports video games, next up I have kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm just going to list FIFA in general. I started playing this right around my freshman year of high school back in 2014. My first FIFA game that I owned was actually FIFA 14, but I also played FIFA 13 a little bit. All the way up until the second to most recent one. I have not bought the most recent FIFA yet. This game is a ton of fun. I'm definitely a competitive person, so when it comes to online gaming, absolutely love it. When you have a skill gap, and there's definitely a ton to learn in these FIFA games. Skill moves, power shots, finesse shots, all the above. Yeah, FIFA being a great time. Wanted to make sure that I threw at least a shout out in here for those games. So, second on my list of honorable mentions is going to be The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. This game was played for me on the GameCube, but it was also released for the PlayStation 2 and later ported back into the original Xbox system, which just kind of goes to show you how old this game was, but it did not have an impact on the replayability whatsoever. This game has a lot of missions. The first one being where the Two Towers storyline kind of ends off. You start as Gandalf kicking a whole bunch of orc ass at Helm's Deep, and then it pivots to the Return of the King storyline. And it's really good because you can play as basically any character from that movie. All the hobbits, Gimli, Legolas, Aragorn, Gandalf, not Boromir, R.I.P. But yeah, this game was awesome. Once you got to the end of it, through Gollum into the pits of Mount Doom, you unlocked what was basically a zombies slash spec ops kind of side mission where you just basically had to try and survive for as long as you could against a whole bunch of different enemies, some being harder to beat than others. But yeah, me being a Lord of the Rings fanboy, this was definitely one of my favorite games of all time. The next game on my list of honorable mentions, I think, will probably be a trigger to some of the viewers watching this, but for me, it is going to be GTA 5. I remember buying this game right when it came out for the PlayStation 3, and again, it was a ton of fun. The only reason why I have it so low, I think, is probably due to the fact that I never really got into the online mode and just kind of dicked around in single player a whole bunch and kind of uncovered what was going on the map and all the different things you could do. And I remember plugging in a whole bunch of cheats and just playing around with those, jumping off buildings, spawning in vehicles left and right. I remember I had saved a page that showed you all the different cheat codes that you could put in. And boy, was this awesome. I can only imagine how much fun it would be jumping into a game with a whole bunch of friends and doing a whole bunch of missions. But just due to the fact that I really only played this game by myself, I'm going to throw it into my bucket of honorable mention. Next up on my list is going to be the original Gears of War that was released in 2006 as an Xbox 360 exclusive title. The story picks up with Marcus Phoenix, who is a soldier and has been incarcerated for the last 4 years due to leaving his post when serving in order to try and save his father. But the main plot behind the story is that these creatures called the Locust, basically like a human zombie alien hybrid, emerge from the center of the earth and kind of start wreaking havoc. The other big component of the storyline is this thing called emulsion, which I don't really know if it like powers stuff. It kind of seems to act as like a natural resource for like gas and energy. But the story revolves around emulsion and trying to contain those resources and collect them. And it's kind of the battle of resources between the Locust and humans, as well as a more direct conflict, that being most of the gameplay that you're actually doing within the game itself. Again, never really got into the online just due to the fact that I never really figured out how to set up 360 live. But the single player was enough to definitely put this one as at least an honorable mention for me. You could also play this campaign in co-op mode, which made it even more fun, being able to play with a friend. But it was awesome. Absolutely badass game. You had a chainsaw on your gun. You could tear enemies to shreds. And yeah, definitely worthy of a mention in my top video games of all time. I should have added a spoiler alert earlier in the video when I was talking about Madden 08, because I had mentioned that I was going back and forth between Madden and this other game, and that other game is Mario Kart Double Dash. This game was the first Mario Kart and the only Mario Kart that I ever owned, although it wasn't the first that I ever played. I do remember playing one of the earlier Mario Kart games for the Nintendo 64 over at my cousin's place sometimes, but Double Dash takes the cake for me. It's really replayable, a lot of really good maps, a lot of good carts, you can unlock stuff, and the fact that you can switch between different characters on your cart just means that you have more access to some of those custom items that you would get out of the mystery boxes. And the more you played this game, the more you'd find those shortcuts and hidden paths. And yeah, this game was a lot of fun. If you want the smoke, bring a GameCube and get ready to get your ass whooped. So coming in at number 10 here, we have Garry's Mod, otherwise known as Gmod, which I believe is only playable on the PC, but this game is a ton of fun. I'm probably going to be saying that for every single one of these games, but this one's really interesting because it isn't necessarily a release game from like a big studio developer. It was more so a mod of an amalgamation of different games, and they turned it into more or less an open world / play or make whatever you want to. The highlights for me were always prop hunt. I would also play hide and seek here, which is basically prop hunt, except you can't turn in any props and you just got to hide from the seekers. Pretty standard. And then another really fun game mode was murder, where there would be one person basically chasing around everybody else with a knife. But this game was a lot of fun just because of how goofy and weird it was compared to a lot of these other games with a whole ton of structure in them. So coming in at number 9 on my top 10 favorite video games of all time list is going to be Left 4 Dead 2, which I played on the 360, and I believe this was also only available on the Xbox console. And outside of the Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3 Zombies game modes, which I don't really count as its own game, this is definitely my favorite Zombies video game. And I pondered throwing in the original Left 4 Dead in here because I played both of them a good amount, but I think Left 4 Dead 2 basically took what made the first one so darn good, the core gameplay, and just refined it a good amount in the second game. They ended up adding a bunch of new weapons, they added a bunch of new specialist zombies, and they also had a whole bunch of really cool new maps. The couple that stick out to me, I believe, were both the mall and the carnival, and there were a whole bunch more that I was missing. But there was a whole lot of replayability in this game just due to the amount of weapons and different maps. You could also play co-op, and it was just a grand old time shooting the undead to where they were dead and not undead anymore. So taking the number 8 spot on my list is another Mario title, but it is not a Mario Kart game. This one for me is going to be New Super Mario Brothers, released on the Wii. And I never actually owned a Wii console growing up, but a couple of my friends did. So if I would ever go over there, we would play a whole bunch of Wii Sports and this game. Or if they came over to my house, they would just pack up the Wii console in a duffel bag, bring it over, and we'd hook it up in my parents' living room. And this game was my favorite Mario game because it was really slick gameplay. You could play with up to 4 people. They had a whole bunch of different special items like mushrooms that make you shrink, mushrooms that make you big, the spinner hat, the penguin suit, and a whole bunch of other ones. But yeah, this one was definitely my favorite Mario game of all time. And before I move on, I definitely want to give a shout out to one of my other favorite Mario games, Super Mario 64, that was released back on the N64, way before I was born. But I didn't really get to play that game enough to where I feel comfortable listing it above New Super Mario Brothers. But I wanted to make sure that game at least got mentioned in this list as well. Coming in at number 7, we have Battlefield 4. And I really debated at this spot putting either Battlefield 4 or Battlefield 1 because, again, I played the crap out of both of those games on the PlayStation 4. But I always kind of, when I'm thinking about these two, I gravitate towards Battlefield 4, probably just because this was the first Battlefield that I ever actually played. I was a big Call of Duty guy growing up, and I still do play Call of Duty more than Battlefield. But when Battlefield 4 came out and I got my new PlayStation 4 console, I wanted to switch it up a bit and change it up from the Call of Duty game because it got a little stale at times. And Battlefield 4 was great because it was basically Call of Duty, but a little bit more open world. I love playing the Conquest game mode, which was, I think, a 64 versus 64 game mode. So a ton of players and huge maps. And the thing that was really innovative for me at the time when this game came out was the levelation concept, which basically meant that if you shot a building enough or did some special thing on the map would dynamically change for you. And I thought this was really interesting because A, it's a lot more realistic, and B, it opens up a lot more opportunities within the game and the actual game mode that you're playing. And yeah, this was, again, my first Battlefield. Maybe not the best overall. I know a lot of people say that Battlefield 3 was a great game. But for me, I have the most fond memories of this game, and that is why it is coming in at number 7 on my list. Taking my number 6 spot here, which may be a surprise to some of the viewers that know me, is Guitar Hero 3 Legends of Rock. And this is one of the most nostalgic games for me of all time. Way back when, on Mondays, I would be getting babysat by my aunt, and her son, my cousin, had a PlayStation 2, which I didn't have at the time, and they had Guitar Hero 3 for this game. And I remember my first handful of times playing this game, I didn't know how to like hold the guitar right, so I would lay it flat on the ground and play it like a piano almost. I do not anymore, thankfully, but those are my first memories, and man, did this game have a great track list. There are still songs that I have in my rotation every day from this game, and it was awesome. There were a bunch of customizability factors, different guitars, different skins, had a whole bunch of extra songs on the bonus playlist. And the actual playthrough and the story I thought was pretty cool, where the whole concept is you're starting out as this small time band and you kind of work your way up to like a club, and then you get big enough where this mysterious musical figure comes up to you and has you sign a deal to do a whole bunch of tours and shows and whatnot, only for you to find out at the end of it that it is actually the devil himself. And I thought that was a really cool twist to add on, because the whole core gameplay of this is obviously playing the guitar and playing the songs and trying to hit the notes. But I thought it was cool that they actually added like an interesting story element to the actual playthrough of it. I have played other Guitar Hero games in my life. Guitar Hero 2 was decent, but I thought the hit detection on that one for the notes was a little wonky. And even for this game, I definitely preferred playing it on the 360 versus the PlayStation 2. Unfortunately, nowadays, I do not have a 360, and the actual guitars themselves for the 360, the wireless ones, are pretty pricey. So maybe someday in the future, when I save up a little bit of money, I can go back and buy it, because God knows I would still play the crap out of this one. But that is why Guitar Hero 3 is coming in at number 6 on my list. Taking the number 5 slot on my list today is going to be Overwatch. And this one's kind of different from a whole lot of the other games that are on my list, in the sense that each character that you can play as in the game has different abilities. Whereas if you play something like Call of Duty or Battlefield, even looking at like Guitar Hero or Mario, everyone who's playing kind of has the same opportunities and the same abilities as anyone else and any other character. Whereas in Overwatch, each individual character had their own special ability. Taking Tracer, for example, one of the characters in the game, you could kind of blink forward like a couple meters, and you can do that like up to 3 times consecutively. And then the other ability is you could revert back to where you were like 3 seconds ago, basically like a teleport. And then each character had their own ultimate ability, which basically means that throughout the course of the game, you can build up your points and XP to where you earn that special ability, and it's meant to either deal a lot of damage or do something a little different, to where like Mercy in the healer category of heroes could revive all recently dead teammates, which would be really nice if you're making a push and you lost a couple. You could pull out your ultimate, they all get revived, full health, and you're right back in the fight. And kind of pivoting over to the categories, I thought that was kind of cool too, where you got 4 main categories of heroes and villains. You got tanks, which are meant to basically deal some damage and then take a whole lot of bullets for your team, kind of the front guys leading the charge. Then you have attackers, which are characters that don't have as much health as the tanks, but can kind of deal more damage on a consistent basis, such as Soldier 76. Basically just a Call of Duty guy within this game. But then you also have defense heroes and villains, which are more or less the attackers, but on the defensive side of things, where you're kind of meant to just hold down a spot or two on the map and lock it up for your team. And then the last category I remember are the healers, which I somewhat alluded to, which the name healers meaning that you would just heal all your teammates around you. I never really played as them because I found it kind of boring. I wanted to get into the action, but nonetheless, it was really cool having a dynamic where you need to kind of pick and choose your characters on your team based on who else your team is choosing and what map and game mode you're playing. And due to the fact that you have so many different characters and so many different abilities, different maps, and different game modes, the replayability on this one is probably the best, I would say, from all the games on my list, just in terms of diversity and things you can get out of the game. Coming in at my number 4 spot today is going to be another first-person shooter title, but this is not a Call of Duty or a Battlefield game. This one is actually going to be Halo 3 for me. Halo 3 was an Xbox 360 exclusive title along with all the other Halo games, and this one was my favorite. I have played Halo 3 and Halo 4, not a ton of them. There are a whole bunch of other games, the original Halo, Combat Evolved, Halo 2, ODST, and a whole bunch of other ones that I'm not going to take the time to name here. But this one was my favorite. The campaign was phenomenal. I would actually go so far as to say that this campaign is my favorite campaign that I have ever played in my life. And I actually have another really fond memory of one of my buddies coming over to my place, and we started the co-op campaign at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And it was so much fun, and we were so invested in it that we ended up staying up until roughly 6 o'clock in the morning. And I remember my dad waking up and he came into my room and he saw that we were still awake and he was not happy about it. But that just kind of goes to show you how much fun I had playing this game way back in the day. And I think the reason why I don't have it in my top three is again due to the fact that I didn't know how to set up Xbox Live. So I never got to play the online multiplayer with a whole bunch of other people. It was always just me playing the campaign either solo or with a friend or us messing around in multiplayer. But when it's just you and like one or two other friends in multiplayer, it's a lot slower and a lot more just kind of sandboxy. But nonetheless, this game was awesome. And having not played the first Halo or the second one, I can tell you in terms of the story, it honestly didn't matter a lot to me to where the story within Halo 3 itself was good enough that I didn't even really need to know what happened in the first two, although it would benefit to add into the story. But it was that stinking good. And that is why it is coming in at top four, number four on my list. And I realized while editing this video that I didn't mention it while talking about Halo, but this game has to have the best theme music, debatably, of any game ever created. Let's check that out. So jumping into the top three here, I should note really quick that at this point, the top three games are pretty close to being interchangeable. And honestly, I would even go so far as to throw Halo 3 in there. If it had the multiplayer again, I'm sure it would be number one. But a lot of these games are kind of interchangeable. But for number three, it's going to be Fortnite. And I still remember one of my good friends, my freshman year of college when I was in the dorms, reaching out to me early on my first semester and mentioning this random game called Fortnite. And I didn't really think anything of it. And I was playing other games, wasn't really interested in trying out a new one at the time. And so he eventually came over to my dorm and forcibly downloaded it on my PlayStation because it was a free-to-play game, which is also a reason why it's a really awesome game and top three for me. But as soon as I started playing this game, I absolutely fell in love with it. It was, again, so different from the typical like Call of Duty or Battlefield to where it was new for me. The building mechanics were really new and it took a lot of time to learn them, but once you actually learned how to do those builds, you could win a lot of different gunfights that you might otherwise not. The other thing that made this game different was that it was in third person mode versus first person. Again, just a little different from the normal games that I'm playing. But yeah, this one was awesome. I know they're still pumping out a ton of content on it. And I have gone back to play this game a couple of times since the original kind of couple of months/years that I played it. And it doesn't really have the same magic to it. I don't know what it is for me necessarily, but the original like year or a year and a half of Fortnite being released was absolutely top tier for me. If they released that game and they had a whole bunch of noobs in it, because nowadays you got a whole bunch of little Timmies and Billies cranking 90s and hitting you with headshots, and it's just really tough to play if you don't play it consistently. So I don't play it a lot anymore, but I will say when I was kind of ahead of the curve way back when when the game was first released, it was a ton of fun. You could squad up, and if you had a good squad, you would absolutely stomp people. And I can tell you there is nothing more satisfying than getting a squad win in a Fortnite game. Taking the runner-up spot for me is going to be another Battle Royale game, but this one for me is going to be the original Warzone. And when I think back to when I say original Warzone, a lot of people might think Verdansk, which that is also kind of what comes to mind for me. I remember when COVID first started happening and we were all shacked up. This is kind of when I started first playing that game. And my God, did I get my days played on that. It was literally like every single day during COVID. I would be on with my buddies until like 3 in the morning, having like 7-hour sessions, and it was a blast. It was Call of Duty, but just more refined, where you had a lot more flexibility. You could take bullets, you had an open map, you had cars, had a whole bunch of different weapons to use, and a whole bunch of different game styles to try out. And this was not my first Battle Royale game, but I think it takes the cake over Fortnite, just because since I was a little kid, Call of Duty has been my go-to game. And this was a ton and ton of time that I had invested into the game. And pivoting a little bit from Verdansk, once I kind of got, tired of that, I don't know if tired's the right word, but once I wanted a little bit of a transition, I ended up going over to Rebirth Island, which is a resurgence game mode, meaning that you can actually respawn, whereas on the original Warzone, if you died, you go to the Gulag. If you win that 1v1, you end up respawning back in. If you lose it, you're dead and your teammates have to buy you. But on Resurgence, there's a timer after you die, and if you still have teammates alive after that timer, you can come back and respawn without teammates having to buy you. Rebirth is probably like my favorite Call of Duty Warzone game slash mode slash map. I ended up actually getting over 1,000 wins on that game, which is almost a little pathetic to say. Still very proud of it. But yeah, I still play Rebirth to this day. It's on the newer Warzones like Black Ops 6. And while it's still fun, it doesn't really have the same magic to it that the original Warzone did have. And it might be a cop-out answer mentioning Warzone. I know I had mentioned the Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3 zombies modes before, not counting them as games. Whatever. Again, this is my list. Sue me. But yeah, that is definitely one of my favorite Call of Duty games, and Warzone is going to take the number 2 spot for me.
Revenge is like a ghost. It takes over every man it touches.
Was there ever a doubt? Coming in at number 1 for me is the original Modern Warfare 2 title, released in 2009. This game is the pinnacle of gaming for me. I know if you talk to a lot of the old heads that still game today, most of them will mention this game as being one of their favorites. And for me, that is definitely the case. I remember back in 2000, I think it was actually 2009, maybe leading into 2010, I didn't actually have this game, and this was still in the period where I had a 360 but didn't have Xbox Live. So I never got to play the online a ton until I later got a PlayStation 3. But I would go over to a friend's house and we would just switch off on the controller because this didn't have co-op online at the time. But we would just play it for hours, and goodness gracious, this game is bombastic in that everything is overpowered. I think there was one gun that kind of sucked, which was the F2000. Never really used it, but you had awesome guns like the ACR, which was an absolute laser beam, the UMP, which could kill in like 2 bullets if you were accurate with it. And then don't even get me started on the sniping. The Barrett, you could spam it as fast as you want. There wasn't really a cap on how fast you could be spraying semi-auto weapons. So if you had a good trigger finger, the Barrett could basically turn into a shotgun slash machine gun at close range. And then the best sniper of all time, of course, goes without saying, is the Intervention. I could quick scope on that game for hours and hours on end. And I know I had mentioned that I put a lot of time into Warzone and Rebirth, but I honestly might have more time played on the original MW2 just because it was the first one that really captured like the full magic of Call of Duty for me. I remember I had bought the original Modern Warfare back in like 2007, and then I had gotten World at War in 2008 and loved both of those games as well. I absolutely adored them. But Modern Warfare 2, once I transitioned over to the PS3 and got online, it was just a different beast altogether. It was just magic in a bottle, and Activision has not been able to recreate that yet. I know I was super excited when Modern Warfare 2019 was coming out, And while Warzone was fantastic, the multiplayer wasn't the same for me. And the next best thing I could say from MW2 would probably be Black Ops 2, and I definitely want to give a shout out to that one on this list. I didn't want to bog down the list with Call of Duty games. Black Ops 2 multiplayers was great, but it just wasn't the same as Modern Warfare 2. And again, if I had a group of friends or if the servers were still good and not overran by hackers, I'm sure I would still be playing this game consistently today just because of how fun it was. Only downside of this game, in my opinion, was the noob tube and one man army combo with Danger Close. That was absolutely cancerous, even though I did take advantage of that a couple times. Outside of the gameplay, what I did just kind of mention is the hackers. There were so many modded lobbies, and early on it wasn't that bad, but after a couple of years, that's just kind of how games work nowadays. If you don't have a really fantastic anti-cheat, it's just going to eventually get overrun by hackers. And I do remember actually getting into a couple of hacker lobbies, and I did take advantage of it. I think it's past the statute of limitations now where I can say that I did get full prestige on a modded lobby, got all my camos, a bunch of XP. That was all cool, but that was years down the line after people were already moving on to newer Call of Duty titles. But yeah, I really hope that they end up remastering this game and releasing it, specifically the multiplayer. I know they did the campaign at one point, and then IW4X came out with like all the MW2 mechanics with a whole bunch of different maps. I never actually got to play that because I'm a console person, not PC. But I would love if Activision would listen to their fan base a little bit and actually release what has been a success in the past and what people say is a really good game, that being, Modern Warfare 2, World at War, the original Modern Warfare, Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2. A lot of the newer games just aren't cutting it for me in the Call of Duty series. But yeah, I've been rambling on enough. This game is definitely my favorite game of all time. I would play the crap out of it if I could and there weren't hackers anymore. But yeah, that is my top 10 video games of all time list. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Otherwise, I will ring your bell. But with that, Jim Owl, aka Hindu, out. Hoot hoot.